welcome everybody to BreathLAB 4.0. Owen Roy is going to be an increasing part. I want to let you just get to know this gentleman. He's going to be an increasing part of BreathLAB. He is powering the engine, and he's coming up with some really incredible opportunities for us as a community to begin to explore our breath and quantify that together and begin to look at how our breath can make a difference in our day-to-day lives, in our physiology, etc. So thank you very much, Owen. Welcome, everybody. We've got three very special panelists today, and also say hello to my hostess with the mostest, the founder of Hacked Fitness in New York City, New York City's first biohacking gym, Pamela Gold. What's up, Pam?
What's up? So excited for today. Love the hold.
Dude, I'm going to let you loose. You had so many questions on the interstitium and all the other questions on fascia for Jill Miller after the last one. We never got around to it. So we're going to actually fold in the hold. I want to actually go back there and let you loose on all of those topics that you had questions on last time.
It's going to be fun.
We have with us today Mr. Dan Brule, the founder of breathmastery.com. He teaches Tony Robbins, Mark Divine, a number of special operations around the world, and he is getting ready to bring all of us, coming up in the next 12 months, some of the most incredible new stuff that we could possibly imagine. Please welcome Dan Brule. We also have Jill Miller. She is responsible for The Roll Model, the book that's currently saving my life, how to roll around on different sizes and consistency of balls to work on myofascial release. She has yoga fitness. She does tune-up fitness. She's written all kinds of bestsellers. I'm literally not going to list her resume. It's very, very, very serious. This woman knows exactly what she's talking about when it comes to breath, brain, and body. Please help me welcome Jill Miller. Last but not
welcome,
least,
Jill.
on the panel today, Kiki Bosch. Kiki Bosch is a new friend of mine, and I've spent an inordinate amount of time talking to this girl this week. This girl is a cave dweller, an international traveler, a medicine girl, a leading breath practitioner. She has been a free diver. She just had a movie that came out about her, and if you go to disturbthecomfort.com, you can find out more about her. Please help me welcome a new and dear addition to my personal breath family and to the BreathLAB family, Miss Kiki Bosch. Dan Brule, Jill Miller, Kiki Bosch. These are our panelists today. I want to just go ahead and get us started. We had inhale, we had exhale, and we had hold now. Hold is that beautiful, like anti-gravity moment that Owen suggested. It's that space where we're neither inhaling nor exhaling. I'd like each of our three panelists to take a minute and just sort of talk initially about their sensation, their feeling, their experience with the hold from the school method and or practice that they're currently holding near and dear to themselves right now. Dan, why don't you give us a start?
Yeah, I would differentiate right from the beginning kind of a qualitative difference between the word hold and the word pause. You know, holding, there's something about, you know, locking up our system, holding, blocking, containing, even forcing, where pause is kind of softer, it's open. It's passive, and in many ways it's more natural. So I guess we could use the terms interchangeably, hold versus pause, but I like the feeling of the difference between a hold and a pause. It's really important to me. For example, what a lot of people call holding the breath, I like to think of as an open pause, right? And I love that notion of the pause, just like a rest in music. You know, it's just a beautiful part of the flow of music. In the same way, pauses are a beautiful part of the flow of the breath, very natural part of the flow of breath. So, so that's one thing I just want to put out between pause and hold. And the other thing is that there is this natural pause. And I don't know if they call it a pause, but a transition point between the inhale and the exhale, or between the exhale and the inhale. There's a transition point, not necessarily a pause. And that pause can be introduced anywhere along the flow of the inhale or anywhere along the phase of the exhale. So I can pause with 1/3 of my breath full, half of my breath full, 3/4 of my breath full, or totally full. I can pause with 100% of breath held in me, with 90% of breath held in me, with 80%, 50%, 40%, all the way down the line. So that's where we can get creative. And that's where very often injecting conscious pauses in that at some point in the phase can mean a lot and can result in a lot. So I've got a lot more, but I want to hear from everyone.
Thank you, Dan. Jill, you should take it next. Just talk to us a little bit about hold, and if you want to go on Dan's side of pause, because actually Owen and I had this discussion in the beginning of this. We were like, hold, pause, hold, pause. We thought everybody else would get hold. Dan, you're right. It's really a pause. Jill, would you like to comment on that, or do you want to go anywhere with that?
Great opening, Dan. There's so much to talk about with the hold or pause, whatever we decide to use as a term. I think hold is a smart marketing term, Sage, because I think that's it's a very hot word right now, and that people are training in breath holding practices. And so that makes a lot of sense. From where I'm coming from, this transition that Dan's talking about needs a differentiation, because there are very different qualities to, in my work, especially in the breath work that I teach, I differentiate the inhale hold, I call it suspension, and then the exhale hold, I call it vacation, but it's not a vacation where you're not present. And so there's such different physiological qualities on each end of the spectrum of the inhale hold versus the exhale hold. So that's one thing I'm sure we're going to be differentiating that and talking through. But that pause, the suspension or the vacation, those end feels of your breath cycle give the breather, the human, this chance to have a super study of their physiology that's different from the experience during inhale versus during exhale. And these places in breath holding are ripe for our ability to gather awareness in our interoceptive, in our body's physiological sense of its self, the way our body speaks to itself in a subtle way. And to me, that is so incredibly exciting. It's just compelling in all ways. And then the last sort of high level thing I'd like to throw out about the hold or the pause is that in terms of programming, those of you that teach breath work, I mean, this is where the party happens. There is so many things that you can do, that you can cue and that you can clue for helping to develop your students' sense of awareness, their sense of sensation, their sense of embodiment or disembodiment, wherever you want to take them, that these hold times are critical for excellence in your programming as an educator.
Mm. Wow, we're going to come back to that, the hold times. That's significant, what you just said. I'd like you to unpack that for us. That's an entire BreathLAB episode right there, Jill. Thank you. That is significant and profound. Everyone listening, please understand. Also, the positive and negative breath hold. Breath hold at the top versus breath hold at the bottom. We're going to revisit that one too. Ms. Bosch, where are you, Kiki? Kiki Bosch. There she is. Hello, Kiki.
Awesome. So first of all, thank you for having me. And yeah, Dan, I really, really like, the idea of a pause instead of a hold. I think that's more how I see it as well, as a certain pause, almost a pause of being. Like both the inhale and the exhale, they feel so active still, while the hold for me gives me this space between my thoughts. And like Jill, you just mentioned how you can use that breath hold to really see into yourself. So for me, that's really what the breath hold itself is about. It's this interoceptive capacity of the mind as well to see what is between thoughts, as a void of expression, as a void of being. And yeah, that's kind of what the breath hold to me always has been. It's the quieting down of this interoceptive capacity, and to really slow down and observe what little sense. So So yeah.
Thank you. Can you please, you've used that word interoceptive twice, and Jill used it too. For those of us among this group that just don't know what interoception is, can you please explain, because when you and I started talking, we talked about inhale, exhale, hold, polyvagal theory and emotion and the effect of breath on all of those things. And I'm going to ask you to get into that a little more, but can you just briefly define interoception in the most basic, simple way that you can for everybody who's going to watch this or who's watching it now is like, huh?
For me, the idea of interoception is to dare and actually feel and sense and see what is happening inside of you. Like often when we hold our breath, we have the time and the space and the room, because our body is quiet, to actually observe what's happening in our body. How do we feel? Do we feel our hands tingle, or do we feel our blood pumping? To me, that's interoception, to dare and dive into seeing how the body functions, to dare and listen to the blood, to the heart, to literally all of our being that's reacting now to this increase in oxygen or this decrease in carbon dioxide.
Okay. Jill, would you like to jump in on interoception? Since
Yeah,
I
so to understand interoception now is different than understanding interoception 10 years ago. So there's a researcher, you should all just Google him after this, Bud Craig, Budcraig, and he is the world's foremost expert on interoception. So when we're talking about interoception, it is small nerve fibers that are nestled into different structures throughout your body, from skin to organ. These nerve endings can be pressure sensors, they can be heat sensors, and they have always been understood as the field of feel in your organs, in your viscera. But what Bud has been able to show is that interoceptive nerve endings, all of them travel through a different spinal pathway called the lateral thalamic pathway. And if you get his book, you'll be very in a lot of pain reading through it and trying to understand. I'm not a neuroscientist. I try to make sense of all the things that I parse out from different experts. But what the interoceptive nerve endings, where they go to, is the thalamus and the insula. And so this body sense of itself, the sense of organ movement. So when we feel food moving through our guts, we feel sexual desire, that's interoceptive. We feel the need to pee, that's interoceptive. We feel our heartbeat, that's an interoceptive signal. We process and feel breath, that's also another interoceptive experience. The need to have a bowel movement, these are all sensed through the interoceptive cortex. But also pain, which are slow moving pain signals, are also gathered in this umbrella term of interoception, which is not going to our body's sense of its movement self. So our body's sense of its movement self has to do with proprioception, our body parts. But interoceptive is that subtle physiological listening. And people who breathe, people who do breath practice, you guys are mainlining, you're feasting in the interoceptive world. And when you have high interoception, this is documented in the literature, you tend to be a little bit more in touch with your own emotions, with your feelings, literally your feelings, and those of others. So anyway, that's the kind of like by the book summation, but your implicit body feelings are through the interoceptive cortex.
Thank you, Jill. Dan, you've worked a great deal on a number of styles over the years. You've studied everywhere. What do you know? What have you experienced with the breath hold now that you can share with us that maybe no one's ever thought of because we haven't been doing it 45 years, jumping around the world doing it? What's some gem? What's something that you've experienced that you know from 45 years about the hold that's not being taught in Wim Hof method, that's not currently being talked about with all of the other performance and apnea stuff? Is there some kind of woo to the hold? Is there a moment in the hold? Is there a spiritual jewel or gem in the hold? Is there something that you've discovered that you've never seen anywhere else in the hold that you'd like to share with us now?
Well, a lot of what we do in terms of exercises and techniques, they're often based on very natural responses that are observed. So that pause halfway through the exhale, for example, would be where somebody pulls the trigger on a gun, right? So you wouldn't go, you know, and you wouldn't, you take a normal breath in, you release the exhale, and you come to this neutral zone. And that's where you would pull the trigger. So my playing, my research, my experience is in going back and forth between holding at those points where there are forces pushing and pulling on us. For example, when I'm completely full of breath or completely empty. If I relax at either of those points, my breath is going to move. I can't suspend my breath at the full point without exerting force. And I can't suspend my breath at the empty point without fighting certain forces, right? But the pause at the neutral place, where it takes an equal amount of effort to inhale as it does to exhale, where there are no forces of inhaling, no force of exhale pushing or pulling on me. There's a certain quality to the pause that occurs there that cannot occur anywhere else that you try to insert the pause, right? So maybe that's a difference between aligning with the natural pause versus, you know, creating an artificial pause or a manipulative kind of approach versus a flowing, surrendering kind of approach. And people wake up in those pauses. That's in those moments where we have these aha moments. And as soon as we have the aha moment, we kind of lose it, because what just happened? We were in that pause. It gelled into some kind of an insight. Being in that stillness, in that pause, allows something to bubble up, some aha, some insight. And then as soon as we grab onto it with our rational mind or our ordinary consciousness, we burst the bubble of that pause from which that insight arose. That's why I say, you know, I'm enlightened. Ooh, I just lost it. Like you had that moment of insight, and then as soon as you kind of acknowledged it or got that you got it, you lost it. What's happening there is that you were in that pause, but you weren't conscious of it as a pause. And from that pause, something deep arose within you, and it could be heard because of the stillness and the silence that's not usually there. Breath is coming, breath is going, thoughts are coming, thoughts are going, I'm moving, I'm thinking, I'm feeling. And in the middle of all that, to pick up some quiet, deep, subtle insight, that's a challenge. But in that moment or in that space of a pause, that's when this inner voice or inner wisdom can be heard or can be expressed. And no sooner is it heard or expressed, that it kind of pushes us right out of the state that allowed us to get it.
Dan, can I ask you a little bit more about that? Can I ask you a little bit more about that, Dan? Because when I first studied breath work, it was through yoga, my teacher, Alan Finger, and he really distinguished between the pause between the inhale and the exhale, and then of course the pause between the exhale and the inhale. And what I learned when I first studied with him was that, there's different kind of brain states and qualities in those two different pauses. So if I were to hold my breath, take that big breath in and hold my breath, I'm more likely to kind of have more critical thinking and maybe get more angry and get more kind of wrapped up in things, as opposed to pausing after the exhale before the inhale. That's where we could cultivate more compassion and more empathy and kind of softness. So is that your experience? Can you go into that a little bit more too?
Yeah, because I mean, the psychological and emotional states are exactly expressed and reflected by our breathing. I mean, that's why pranayama was invented originally, to regulate the mind and regulate emotions. Because the yogis learned that when my breath is quiet, my mind is quiet. And when my breath comes to an absolute pause of natural stillness, my mind moves to that point of absolute pause and stillness. And that's why the yogis started playing with their breath and trying to regulate and control their breath. They were really trying to regulate and control something else, their emotions, their mind, their attention, and so on. And so the quality of the pause is everything. I mean, if I'm holding my breath and I'm tightening everything and blocking everything and fighting everything, that's a very different experience than if I just find myself in a natural pause and I just relax into it. You could say in that moment, someone on the outside will say, wow, he's holding his breath in that moment, but the internal experience is completely different. And I loved, I think it was Lynn, you mentioned almost like if it was a slip or you meant to do it, that the space between thoughts is aligned with that pause between breaths, that there is a connection. And meditation, what's meditation? Meditation is dropping into the pauses between thoughts, dropping into the pause between thoughts, right? And we drop down into the ground of our being, into the source of our thoughts when we dive into that pause. And so breath holding, breath pausing and playing with the breath like that, it's really something else. We're working on something else, and the breath is just serving us in that moment.
Kiki, thank you, Dan. Kiki, go. You've spent an inordinate amount of time underwater dealing with what Owen talked about at the beginning, that survival and performance.
Yeah.
That's a little bit different than the sort of spiritual direction, and yet you and I have talked and you're in possibly woo. Can you maybe rectify some of the science and the woo-woo when you're, let's say, 80, 100 feet down, you're holding your breath? How does the science of this and the spirituality of this play out in a real life situation where you're underwater and your life's at stake? What's that work like?
Well, I think first of all, it depends on, of course, my background is in free diving. So then when you breathe on the surface, you take a massive inhale, because when you dive down under the pressure, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And you almost feel like, you literally feel your lungs shrinking. So then there at the bottom, you have a type of different hold. It's almost an empty hold, yet you know it's full. So yeah, I would differentiate between diving and holding the breath in the depths compared to just doing it on the surface. But for me, when you dive down there or hold your breath in general, the expansion, like Dan just said, you know, the momentary, even the capacity to find out what is between your thoughts. And when I go to the more esoteric side of things, through the diving practices and through doing this quite a lot, I also started to see that there is almost an identification with that being on the hold compared to the thoughts and the madness before and after. So yeah, I don't know if that little bit answer your question.
Sure. So basically what you're saying is then in free diving, a positive hold, which is a full inhale and a hold, as you descend, will begin to feel and transition like a negative hold. So if there are, and Brian McKenzie's taught me a great deal about this, the panic switchers, he calls them, quote unquote, at the bottom. When you do a breath hold at the bottom, for some reason, if you're going to freak out, that's where you freak out. That's where I freak out. I don't freak out. I can hold forever there at the top. Get me exercising in an apnea, and then you get me at the bottom, have me hold, and I will turn and burn. I will cry. I will shake 30 seconds in. I'll act like, and I can check my emotional regulation on a negative breath hold. Positive breath hold, I can be in a really bad state. Hold it forever makes no difference. As soon as the air's gone, Kiki, what is it about a positive breath hold then turning into a negative breath hold? Will you experience the emotional shifts that you would normally feel from a positive to a negative breath hold in that cycle as you dive?
Yeah, definitely. I would say emotionally, you also know that this switch is literally where your limitations almost are, because then you realize, okay, if I feel that now, I still have to swim all the way back up. So it's almost this switch of, I would even go into Jill's idea of interoception, or like explanation of interoception. When you feel those pressure sensors in a different way, and you switch. And then you go back up, and almost this breath hold again expands then inside of you, switching back again to a more calmer state of being once you resurface again, then being able to take that next inhalation as a totally different person, because you've gone through the emotional shifts yourself.
Well, when I was training a deep sea diver, we were practicing breath holding, and one of the ideas that we all kind of rallied around was this concept of running on empty. And the idea was, let's practice holding our breath with no air in us, and then dive and work and so on. And then when you do the same job with a full breath, you realize, wow, this is so much easier. So it was psychological training, but it was something else also. This idea of running on empty. If you can run on empty, and if you can perform on empty, then you're sure as heck going to be able to perform a lot better when you're full. And so we trained by running on empty. And the other thing was, when you're absorbed in something, for example, I was absorbed in rescuing somebody. I was absorbed in trying to locate something in the dark, underwater. I was absorbed in something beautiful, off in the distance, that I looked like $1,000 possible seashell that I could sell in Waikiki. When you become absorbed on something like that, you forget about holding your breath. You're not holding your breath anymore. You're involved in your performance. You're going towards your target. You're not thinking about holding your breath. You're not trying to hold your breath. And if you're doing that, you're in a lot of trouble, because if you're having to think about holding your breath and try to hold your breath, and you've got something else you need to deal with, your attention is already stolen and robbed, and you can't perform. So finding this peace in the pause is based, it's dependent on already being comfortable with a pause. So if you can only hold your breath for 30 seconds or 20 seconds or 15 seconds, then you're not going to hold your breath long enough to break into these different states of consciousness. These shifts in your chemistry and all that stuff isn't going to happen unless you can tolerate a pause. And then pretty soon, instead of tolerating a pause, you're literally enjoying it. And that's when the training goes to another level. Now it doesn't require effort or discipline. There's a joy in it. There's an ecstasy in it. And that's then becomes the new danger, because that's rapture of the deep. That's, that's nitrogen narcosis. That, there's a lot of other things that can happen that you feel really wonderful, but boy, you're in a lot of trouble. And so, we have to get comfortable, and the average person it's not their job, and maybe not even their interest, to reach these extreme states or abilities. But you want to have some comfort there, that you can tolerate a pause if you need to, if it happens, and you can tolerate it comfortably. And if you can tolerate the pause comfortably, that opens your awareness, it relaxes your body, and then you can extract some real juice from the experience. And you can also, you're now available to something more sublime, more powerful, more deeper, brighter.
Yes.
But I suffered shallow water blackout twice. And so I know the danger of going too far, too fast, or skipping over some safety drill or principles.
Safety first, always safety first. And it's a great segue, because Jill, talking about the physiological, kind of on the more science side, right? The physiological response, and then you'd mentioned the cueing. I would love to hear more about both of that, if you can share. The unmuting conundrum. There you go.
Okay, I got it. Where should I jump in on that? There were so many threads.
You're in charge. This is
I'm in
you.
charge.
What do you? Yeah.
Okay.
What do you?
Well, for Kiki, I'm just bowing down to you and to your endurance and your strength of going down underwater. I dove into my friend's 8-foot pool a few weeks ago. I couldn't handle the pressure in my ears. And I was like, okay, I think I've hit a threshold in my life now where free diving is going to be off the table. It was just the silliest physiological response, was just feeling that pressure. And I've had that pressure in my ears before, flying on planes or sudden drop in, in air pressure, that sort of thing. But I had never had that kind of pain underwater. And so I'm aware of the amount of pounds of pressure that your rib cage, that your guts, that your brain, that your face is subjected to. And the fact that you can, find that peace there. I'm in awe of all the free divers in the house. So let me just bow down to all of you, because I am a pressure experimenter, but I don't subject myself to submersion pressure. So one of the things that I do to help people attenuate, and this is what Dan was alluding to, I think, is attenuating some of these involuntary responses within the rib cage, within the abdomen, within the throat, the urge to breathe, that air hunger that isn't just interoceptive, but the air hunger starts to then go to even more peripheral tissues, and we'll start to have contractions, involuntary contractions that the autonomic nervous system is sending to the muscle spindles, right, to tensors within the muscles to basically create the act of inhaling in order to get that next breath in, because in the body, breath always wins. Without breath, you die. And as Dan attests to the shallow water blackouts. And so I think one of the challenges or one of the intrigues, not challenges, one of the intrigues is figuring out how to, safely perform different thresholds of breath holding, either at the top or the bottom, and then subject ourselves to pressure, to stretch. And I use tools. I use balls, especially on breath-related structures, neck, rib cage, abdomen, pelvic floor, to really mold and model the body around the diaphragm, really bend it, pivot it, compress it, change the shape of the ribs, forbid the ribs to move in one direction, or forbid some ribs to move. And this all happens by, angles, and then sort of stuffing or sucking air into these awkward positions. Because your body is such an amazing dynamic organism, you can breathe in any position. I might have said this on the last one, but if you are a fan of opera or rock, you'll see people down on the floor in the weirdest positions getting, belting out sounds. So I guess I'll open with kind of the soft tissue pressure talk. So this is about affecting fascial tissues, and your fascial tissues drive all the way into your lungs. They're not just fascia surrounding your rib cage, but our fascias are going all the way to the alveoli. So pressures on the surface of the ribs are going to be impacting the mobility and of the alveoli themselves, right down to epithelial tissue in the capillaries, down to the lymphatic channels within your lungs. We can do so much to attenuate our body's ability to tolerate breath holding, tolerate being without a steady flow of oxygen, and so on. The other thing I wanted to respond to was, so in the dive, in the free dive, you are at the top of the inhale, but you have this strange flip in your mind of actually being in without air, right? Even though you're full of air. In the yoga space, which is really my background, I started studying yoga when I was 11. We have and Pamela can probably relate to this and all the other yogis, but we have, there's a term for the spontaneous cessation of all breathing, and it happens after the exhale, and it's called Kevala Kumbhaka, and it's really this being without air for what seems like epochs of time. Usually this happens in a deep yoga nidra, where you have been cued by an external voice or by your own internal process of getting yourself into a deeply hypnotic yoga nidra state. And then the body, the metabolic demand becomes so low that there's no need for another breath. And that is that spontaneous state of Kebalikumbaka. And in a lot of the yogic texts, this is like it's a really highly revered state, because at that point, really, if we look at it physiologically, with no metabolic demands on us, we're really free to be in pure consciousness or pure witness state or pure awareness, without the drag of all this, heart beating and breath moving and things flowing. But of course, you are alive. Cells are turning over, even in Kebalikumbaka. You will need another breath in eventually. So those are my thoughts on responding to Dan and to Kiki.
Yeah, no, that's really beautiful. It aligns perfectly with my experience. And what a great idea to play with balls and find those places where you can restrict the breathing, put the body in an uncomfortable position, and learn to breathe in that position. That's really wonderful training. And, in that breathless state comes to almost everyone in a rebirthing breathwork session, after you've been doing a lot of active breathing for time, and then the person just goes into this yogic breathless state. And sometimes it's frightening to the observer, because it goes a long time, they turn blue, and then we always watch at that moment when they come back. Are they like snapping back into their body like it's a shock, or do they have a gentle transition? And that gentle transition is a sign that something deeper has healed or has been accessed than this shocking re-entry into the body. And the other thing I want to make a note of is that while we were playing, divers and so, we're playing with real pressure. And I can remember the first time I was under real deep pressure underwater and I heard my voice. It sounded like I was breathing helium, but I wasn't. Just the pressure of the ocean around my throat. When I spoke through the radio, I sounded like Mickey Mouse. So those real pressures that what I realized, what we were dealing with or what was getting in our way or stopping us wasn't that pressure from the environment. It was our psychological and emotional reactions to those feelings of pressure that determined everything. So breath work gives us a chance to create some psychological pressure, some emotional pressure, and then practice relaxing in the midst of that pressure. And it's very healing, and we always heal, or we always grow something whenever we volunteer for an episode like that. So without even having to practice breath holding or deep diving or anything, you can create internal psychological, emotional stress and use that to train against, to practice tolerating and overcoming. And then the next time you're in an environmentally stressful situation, your internal reactions have already been modified and adjusted, and you're dealing with different things. And my big lesson is we're never dealing with the situation. We are dealing with our mind and our body and our emotional reactions to the situation. And so rather than trying to control the situation, we need to get a handle on our emotional and psychological and physical reactions. And in that, we unravel the problem, we overcome, we heal. And so this external pressure is a useful device in the same way that we can volunteer to produce internal pressure to practice and train and drill and overcome.
Thank you, Dan. Let's talk a little bit about unhealthy breath holding. Let's talk about like the worst, most unhelpful form of breath holding. And before we get into that, I want to A/B that against what is currently very hot and happening. Everybody's doing breath holds right now. Breath holds, cold exposure. It's all over, everywhere. It's a thing. That and weekend breathwork certification seminars are the two hottest thing in the world. Maybe holotropic breathing, rave music on the internet. But like in the world of like, it's breath, it's now. It's like, I gotta hold it, I gotta trip out and like see God or colors or something. And what no one's talking about is that the number one dysfunction that I see constantly with people when I get them into a room and I'm gonna breathe them, is that they hold their breath constantly. And they stop between, if like Dan says, 12 o'clock is full, 6 o'clock is empty, 3 and 9 is that respiratory neutral pause. Everybody's holding between 3 and 9 and 12. Like that upper half right here, it's just being held and it's miserable. And they're like, because if you want, Dan, you talked about controlling emotions. If you want to control your emotions, you want to not cry, what's the first thing we do? Emotionally, psychologically, we hold our breath, it pulls it in, we not letting it out, not letting it out, not letting it out. So for those of us who are breath holders, who have not yet maybe entered an advanced state of practice or eradicated that problem, what do the three of you, between the three of you, for the last few minutes have to say about maybe really unhelpful breath holding? How do you catch when you're holding? And if it's supposed to be so helpful when you jump in an ice bath, how can it be what Peter Litchfield says, one of the most dysfunctional breathing, one of the most, 60% of all ambulance calls are because of dysfunctional breathing. So if holding your breath is really good, how is it also really, really bad? Have at it, all three of you.
I'll jump in. This is my bread and butter. This is what I'm dedicated my life to. What's interesting about that notion of chronic breath holding, the inhale hold, the stuck on an inhale, which is an anxiety culture. So an anxiety culture is a culture that's gasp, gasp, hold. And you know the posture of that gesture. Everybody just do it right now. What does it look like in your body when you, right? It's what I call in my programming, the clavicular breath. So it's where you use the accessory muscles of respiration. I call these the tertiary muscles of respiration. So anything that can haul the shoulders up to the neck and get that short-winded air into the upper part of the lung. You're just basically passing air through your mouth, down your pharynx. You're lucky if it tickles a little bit into the upper lobes, and then you're off to the races. You're running, or your finger is triggered on the next email or cell phone or what have you. And even just the act of cell phone holding, which I spend a lot of my days holding a cell phone. I don't know about you guys, but especially since the pandemic has started, this position of hand holding a cell phone or eyes gazing at a computer is a tensional pattern that invariably creates a shortening of the fascial tissues that go right up through this upper shoulder, neck, jaw, eye, and it puts us into the cast or the facsimile of a stress breather, even if we don't mean to be. And so what happens with that, typically the pattern is that we have extremely shorter and tighter. I'm going to name some muscles here. So you guys, if you don't like Latin, just take some breaths right now, deep exhales. But you've got the upper traps. Everybody knows about the upper traps. That's a very famous muscle, but there's something called the levator scapula. There's the anterior and middle scalenes, sternocleidomastoid, and there's something even more superficial called the platysma. And so we can have a bed of tension in this area, and all of these muscles help to hike, as well as the pec minor going deeper, help to hike the shoulder up for that stress breath. And so if I've casted myself into a position of a stress breather, there's a feedback loop that's going on from, it gets really complicated, but it's called special visceral efferents, that connects to the trapezius, but it's going to make us less efficient at full range of motion of breathing because I'm stuck here. My connective tissue is stuck here. I'm not going to have the ability for my ribs, and that's why I have osteo behind me, but your upper ribs, just like all the other 12 of them, they need to move like this. So they have a mobility that goes up and that goes down. But if my first and second rib in this cell phone pattern or this stress computer pattern are stuck in an up position, you can bet your bottom dollar that there's no way you can get full range of motion in your respiratory diaphragm, which is your primary muscle of respiration, because you have this blockade, you have this tension lock pattern that's going to inhibit that full breath pattern. And so many people are what we would say stuck on the inhale, but it's not just that a chemical thing of CO2 and O2, it's a physical pattern. And what does that lead to? Neck pain, shoulder pain, jaw pain, headaches, eye strain. But if your diaphragm doesn't move well, I'll end after this, the diaphragm doesn't move well, it sets up a cascade of poor organ function or poor organ motility. And that can lead to constipation. That can lead to, some of these things are also connected with regional pain syndromes, and then a diminishing of proper interoceptive feedback, to go all the way back to the beginning. And so how do you handle this? Well, one, become aware of your breathing and where your breathing is centered. Are you able to get full gut-based breaths, diaphragmatic breaths? Can you mobilize your ribs completely through thoracic breaths? Or is there a really repetitive claiming of that third zone that's taking over for these other more efficient respiratory areas? And then what do you do about it? You start to do soft tissue work, you do positional work, use tools, get a massage. It's not so easy in a pandemic, but there's lots of stuff that you can do yourself to really update the breath model inside your own body, right? So that the lining of your birthday suit is more comfortable, more efficient, and then you're able to go to these places that Kiki's talking about underwater. Otherwise, the struggle is very real. That feedback loop is gonna be more attuned towards an anxiety response than towards a parasympathetic response.
Thank you, Jill. Very, very, very. We really just need to do one whole breath lab just with you. Just like we need to just pare this down, like one breath lab.
Lab it up.
Kiki, and then we're going to close with Dan. Dan, I'd like you to wrap us up and take us home in a second. Kiki, you, I keep trying to unmute you, and for some reason it won't.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I want to talk to you about, because not only do you dive, and not only you have a vast repertoire of breath, and I don't want to just pin you in as have you trained with Wim Hof, you're a free diver. In your healing work and in your breath work healing, what can you say that would maybe wrap up your entire position and statements thus far about the unhealthy or dysfunction of holding or stuck breath as you've experienced it as a healer and a breath worker in your own life or in your training with other people? Can you just talk to us a little bit about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would immediately follow Jill there, because she was already speaking about the anxiety. And if I look at our own breath hold, and especially the unhealthy ones, it's always when we almost have a faulty neuroception, when we do feel anxious, when we do get this moment of scared or something like that. And then again, we move into, we actually move out of the social engagement stages of polyvagal theory that we were talking about and you mentioned before. So I think it's very important that we become increasingly aware of even just observing the moments in which we hold our breath, to see what is actually triggering us in our environment that's putting us into this state, that's putting us into a more anxious neuroception compared to social engagement with the world. And especially on months like this, or COVID, and there is so much stress everywhere, we're constantly triggered into this fearful perception of ourselves. So how can we actually learn to hold the breath, indeed just working with the diaphragm, just working with that suction and that release, instead of using the breath as a reflection of our neuroception, I would say.
Thank you, Kiki. Senor Brule.
Yeah. Well, I see that we have Lynn Migdal is listening in. Lynn has produced this really beautiful, she's initiated a movement, I think it's called Looking Up. And I've seen one of the videos with some teenagers doing a rap thing about, cell phones, everybody's head is down, they're on their computer, and just training people to, hold your phone higher and look up, just to stop this collection of bad posture training that's happening unconsciously with people looking down on their cell phones. So thanks for reminding me of that. And you also, when I first studied with Carl Stowe, he was always massaging my neck when I was breathing. And I had these ahas, first of all, why the hell is he massaging my neck? And then when I felt into it, I realized, wow, he's I'm using those muscles to breathe, and they're not breathing muscles. Why don't I learn to relax those muscles while I breathe? And as I started playing with that, the extra energy I got and all kind of benefits. So I think the big difference you want to differentiate in the holding or pausing is whether it's chronic and unconscious, or whether it's deliberate and you're consciously doing it for training. Very different pause and hold, right? And whether it's pain and fear-based, so my breath holding is caused by unconscious pain or fear, that's very different than if I'm choosing to hold my breath for curiosity, for experimentation, for training, and so on. So, and that's a yes versus a no kind of thing. Am I holding my breath out of an instinctive or unconscious fear that says no? Or am I deliberately practicing holding my breath out of this big yes about what can I do? What can I accomplish? What's waiting for me? What's to be discovered? Where are my limitations? Very different qualities between conscious and unconscious. And basically, we don't know our weakest link unless we put stress on the chain. And so you might not even know you have a very weak link until it trips you up. So practicing breath holding, breath pausing, and can uncover and reveal a lot of dysfunction, hidden pain, fears, beliefs, emotions, and so on. So it's breath holding is just as much a part of breath work as inhaling and exhaling.
And on that note, I want to thank you, Dan Brule. I want to thank Kiki Bosch. I want to thank Jill Miller. This has been a phenomenal episode. I want to honor what you guys are doing by just taking your time for free and putting this information out there in an era where there's a lot of conflicting information, and breath work is now broaching and breaching into the mainstream. And we as breath people get to have these conversations and put them out there so that the world can take us seriously, because we take ourselves seriously and we want to learn and know and grow. And it's not about a single method or a single school or an ideology. You can't own the breath. You can't patent the breath. You can't trademark the breath. All you can do is venerate and honor and chase the breath if you're like me, if you're like Dan, like Jill, like Kiki, like those of us who are on this call in the middle of an otherwise very, very busy day. We all care about breath. And so I want to thank you. I want to thank Daniel for taking the time to put some links. Dr. Lynn Migdal just put another link in there. It's really cool to see those of you who are participating and learning and contributing to this real life community. If you want to know some of the solutions to the questions and things that have been brought up, it's going to always be in the chat box. Someone somewhere in this community always adds. So thank you, Daniel, for your contribution. Again, thank you, Dan Brule, Kiki Bosch, Jill Miller. That's yogatuneup.com, right, Jill? That's where they can find you? Tuneupfitness.com.
Yeah, and I just put in a recent article that we did on the respiratory diaphragm, and it talks about some of these pressure-based, ball-based things. So yeah, TuneUp Fitness is my website.
Awesome. Please go to tuneupfitness.com. Please go to breathmastery.com and also to Disturb the Comfort or The Comfortable, Kiki?
Disturb the Comfort.
Disturbthecomfort.com. Thank you all, each of you. Thank you to my hostess with the mostest, Pamela Gold. Owen, do you want to take us out? Thank you very much. Owen Monroy, the director of BreathLAB. Everybody, you're going to see and hear more from him. Also, George. George is out here somewhere. George is amazing in the UK. I want to shout out to George for all the work that he's doing on all the BreathLAB stuff. And also, last but not least, Breath Sister from another mister, my partner in Breath Church, Miss Erin Bishop. She's also on the call today. We would not be doing any of this without her. So thank you to each and every one of you who put your time in to make BreathLAB happen for fun and for free currently in the world. Thank you to those of you who donated. We may be moving to a donation pay what you like kind of model, because we do need to support this, and free is getting a little more challenging than we thought. So we're going to go ahead and transition in a fun, fair, and loving way into some more self-supporting role model. And that's it from me. I will see you at the end of the next month. Owen, why don't you take us out? Say hi to everybody and let us know what's coming up and what you want to say.
Yeah, thank you so much to our panelists and to everyone attending. We have a bunch of people that will be watching this on replay. And so feel free to still share the registration link so that we can get the replay out to the larger community. Please help us share the highlights from this episode that will be published over the next week. And we look forward to seeing you guys next time. Thanks so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Dan Brule. Thank you, Kiki Bosch. We'll see you all soon.